My sister dropped off her kids unexpectedly because of an emergency. Later, I discovered on social media that she had left them for a child-free wedding, and it turns out her boyfriend isn't even aware that she has children. Hey everyone, I've been lurking on Reddit for a while but haven't shared my story until now. Today, I really need to get things off my chest. My sister, let's call her Miranda, has always been a major source of stress for me. Our relationship has never been great. She's manipulative and shows many narcissistic traits. Miranda was born prematurely, which seemed to trigger a protective instinct in our parents. As a result, I often felt like I was being overlooked. They would miss my school plays and basketball games, and sometimes forget to pick me up. Birthdays were another sore point. While Miranda would get thoughtful presents that made her happy, I often received things like books or teddy bears that I didn't even like. It's been a persistent feeling of being overshadowed and neglected. Dealing with my parents' favoritism was tough, but Miranda took it further. She thrived on their bias against me. For instance, she once tore up my favorite dress while I was asleep just because a guy she liked asked me out instead of her. I was devastated and couldn't stop crying because I really loved that dress. When I told my parents, they confronted her, and she instantly played the victim, crying and saying she liked the guy first, and that I was doing it on purpose because I hated her. To my frustration, my parents took her side after her sob story, even suggesting that I avoid guys my sister had crushes on to protect her feelings. It felt so unfair because it wasn't my fault that the guy liked me. There was another time I really pushed for my parents to take me to Six Flags for my birthday because I loved adventure. But when Miranda found out, she decided she wanted to go there for her birthday too. Since her birthday was earlier, my parents gave in to her request. She didn't even go on half the rides, and I could tell she chose it just to spite me. So for my birthday, my parents took me to our usual restaurant for dinner. I was really disappointed, but they said there was no point in going to Six Flags again so soon. As we grew older, Miranda's behavior towards me only got worse. She gave me backhanded compliments like, "Your face looks better with glasses," or "You have a boy crush? I thought you were a lesbian." I always tried to stay under the radar, but unlike me, Miranda was everyone's favorite. She played the role of the kind and helpful person to everyone else, but she was a nightmare to me behind closed doors. She'd be nice to me only when she needed something, and once she got what she wanted, she'd ignore or bully me again. She was skilled at making me feel insecure, not just about my looks but also about my relationships. When I was 17, I got my first boyfriend, but Miranda managed to plant doubts in my mind about him, telling me he was too good looking for me and that he would eventually break up with me, so it was better if I broke up with him first. Every time he visited, she'd get too close to him, touching his arms and laughing too loudly. Understandably, my boyfriend felt uncomfortable. After months of Miranda's manipulations, I broke up with him. Looking back, I realized how wrong it was to treat him that way because he seemed like a genuinely nice guy. When I started pursuing engineering in college in a different state, I would return home for holidays only to face more of Miranda's sly and undermining comments. The toxic atmosphere persisted. At 25, Miranda met her husband, Dave, and after 2 years of dating, they decided to get married. Her announcement was surprising to many considering she had been dating other guys secretly, and some of us knew about it. Despite the shock, we were happy that she was settling down with a decent guy. Miranda chose me to be her maid of honor, a decision that thrilled my parents but filled me with dread. I knew that being her male would be challenging, and I was right. Miranda used this role to control and manipulate me, frequently threatening to demote or remove me if I didn't meet her expectations, making the experience incredibly stressful. Whenever she asked for my opinion, I, being honest, would share my thoughts. Each time she would explode, deflect blame onto me, and have yelling fits. To avoid escalating things, I adopted a strategy of staying silent, preferring to keep the peace rather than endure more verbal abuse. One day, as we were discussing wedding plans over lunch, I asked whether the maid of honor would be wearing a different dress to get a better sense of her vision. She started yelling, accusing me of making everything about myself by assuming I was still the maid of honor. We then moved on to the topic of overnight guests and where they would stay. My mom suggested booking air rooms well in advance, and I agreed. Miranda lost her temper, saying she had already discussed this with Dave and they would be booking hotel rooms. If we wanted air rooms, we could book them ourselves. She then berated me for not using my brain enough and insisted that I should consult her before agreeing to anything others wanted, since I was her mao, and essentially worked for her. I shut down, trying to defuse the situation. She continued to rant about how I was being negative and had an attitude. My mom tried to intervene, but Miranda overrode her, saying she didn't want to deal with such an immature maid of honor and that I needed to do better. I remained quiet, just wanting her to stop yelling. Eventually, she decided it was time to leave, intending to head back to her apartment while I returned home. As we reached the car, she continued yelling for another 10 minutes, repeating the same grievances. At that moment, all I wanted was to escape, but my car was a 20-minute walk away, leaving me with no immediate way to leave. The wedding day finally arrived, and while the ceremony itself went smoothly, Miranda found plenty of reasons to argue with me over trivial things. During the reception, she would yell at me in front of everyone, making the atmosphere tense and uncomfortable. I noticed her glaring at me throughout the festivities, whether it was about the music selection or the waitstaff service. When it was my turn to give my speech, I stood up, hoping to share some heartfelt words. Miranda impatiently gestured for me to hurry up. Later, she criticized my speech, claiming I was trying to embarrass her by bringing up her childhood. I was crushed because everyone else seemed to appreciate my speech, and our parents had no complaints. The morning after the wedding, as the chaos settled, I realized the extent of the anxiety I had been feeling over the past few months, all because of Miranda. It finally dawned on me that she had been the problem my entire life. I regretted not being bold enough to back out of the wedding, but I knew my family would have blamed me. Now that the nightmare was over, I could finally focus on my career. A few months later, I met my current boyfriend, Tom. As we started dating and decided to move in together after a year, my parents were thrilled for me. However, Miranda expressed her disapproval, calling Tom too nerdy and just a computer geek. The truth was that Tom worked in IT and earned 3 times what I did, but Miranda had no idea about any of this, and I didn't care. I was in love with Tom, regardless of her opinion. One day, my life took an unexpected turn when my sister announced at a family dinner that she was pregnant. If you're wondering how this affected me, she quickly added that she couldn't wait to see me become an aunt because she was going to need my help a lot during this tough time. I was shaken by her words. Here was an adult expecting a child, yet she wasn't looking to her husband or our parents for help. She was expecting me to babysit. I had no experience with children and had always felt completely alienated from them. The idea of being around kids had never appealed to me, and I was at peace with my decision not to have children. Her words freaked me out. I felt trapped. I knew she would find some way to make me babysit, especially since I worked from home, which would make it easy for her to drop off her child whenever she wanted. There were no boundaries with her, and any attempts I made to set one would be met with my parents' defense of her. When my sister had her first child, I occasionally took care of her. It wasn't too bothersome at first, since her husband worked the night shift, and she had a day job. I was mainly there to look after the child while he got a few hours of sleep. I never had the child entirely on my own, and the first time I babysat, she was already 6 months old, making it a bit more manageable. Unfortunately, this occasional babysitting soon became more frequent, and my sister often criticized my approach to babysitting. I would be trying to work when suddenly my sister or my mother would call, asking about my weekend plans. If I mentioned having no plans, they would insist that I was going to my sister's house so she could take a break, and that was the end of the conversation. Their demands started to feel like I had a secondary, unpaid job. You'd think my sister would at least be grateful, but she never was. Every time I visited, she would call my mom to complain about how I cared for her child. I wasn't changing the diaper right or feeding the baby correctly, just petty things that really bothered me, especially since I was doing her a favor. My sister's manipulative nature was evident. She and I were not close, and she should have been grateful that I was helping out. Instead, she would be nice to my face but then go behind my back, straining our relationship even more. I reached my breaking point, and it started to affect my mental health. Tom noticed it too. We had a talk where I completely broke down. He urged me to stand up for myself, so the next time I was called for babysitting, I flatly refused. Miranda and Mom would call, urging me to do this for family, but I told them to go to hell. I felt I had done enough and wanted nothing more to do with my sister or her child. I cut off all contact with Miranda. She would show up at my door, calling me repeatedly, but I wouldn't open up. My parents tried to get me to forgive her, but they eventually gave up when they realized I wasn't going to budge. I still spoke to my parents occasionally, but that was it. This went on for 2 years until last year, when my mom called to tell me Miranda and Dave were getting a divorce. It was quite unexpected. Even though I wanted nothing to do with her, I was shocked by the news. When I asked more, my mom told me that Miranda had been sleeping with her coworkers. Dave had found all the inappropriate messages on her second phone, which she had always hidden from him. He gathered all the evidence and consulted a lawyer to file for divorce. Miranda was blindsided when Dave handed her the divorce papers. When she tried to reason with him, he told her he knew everything. She begged for his forgiveness, but he left her. I was stunned by the turn of events, but looking back, Dave was definitely too good for her, so I'm relieved he's out of this mess. After Miranda's divorce, she had to move back in with our parents. I often heard complaints from them about how she would stay out all night, returning home drunk and reeking of booze. She was eventually fired from her job for being consistently late, which only drove her to drink more. My parents were left to care for her children while she was out partying. This had been going on for months. Meanwhile, my life was flourishing. Tom and I adopted a dog, and we were thrilled to be dog parents. We bought a house together, both our names on the deed, and we were slowly moving in. We had even discussed marriage, but there was no rush. We knew we were meant to be together forever, so we were taking our time. When I had a housewarming party, I had to invite my parents. Without consulting me, they brought Miranda and her kids along. I was furious to see her, but I didn't want to make a scene in front of everyone, so I kept quiet. Tom welcomed them in and served them drinks while I gave my parents a cold glare. My dad approached me sheepishly, saying he hadn't wanted to bring Miranda, but our mom thought this would be a perfect opportunity for us to reconcile. Miranda loudly instructed her kids to go hug me as I was their aunt. I smiled politely as they hugged me. Miranda then started lecturing me on being a more involved aunt, saying the kids hardly knew me and I should make more of an effort. I gritted my teeth, struggling to keep my composure and avoid saying something that would embarrass her in front of everyone. Throughout the party, I noticed Miranda drinking wine continuously, completely oblivious to what her children were doing. Her kids were extremely rowdy, chasing after my dog, trying to kick it or pull its tail. They kept trying to barge into our bedroom, which I had closed to keep guests out. They even broke a vase while playing. I was reaching my boiling point, constantly glancing at Miranda to see if she would intervene, but she didn't seem to care. She was too busy drinking and laughing, completely carefree. When some guests wanted to take a house tour, Miranda tagged along. I showed everyone around, and when we reached the backyard, Miranda loudly remarked that the space was too big for just 2 people and started asking if I was planning on having kids. This comment immediately drew everyone's attention, and they looked at me expectantly. I quickly shut her down, telling her it was none of her business. Miranda retorted that my life choices were everyone's concern, especially as an aunt. I felt the frustration building up, but I managed to keep my composure in front of the guests. As the evening went on, Miranda's level of intoxication increased, and her behavior became more disruptive. She started making inappropriate comments about my relationship with Tom, implying that we were wasting our time by not getting married and having children. I could sense the discomfort in the room, but I chose to ignore her remarks. Later, when most of the guests had left, I decided it was time to address the situation. I pulled Miranda aside and confronted her about her behavior. I expressed my disappointment, especially given our history. As expected, Miranda didn't take it well. She accused me of being stuck up and ungrateful for all the time she claimed I owed her for babysitting her children. My parents tried to mediate the situation, with my mother urging me to forgive Miranda once again. However, I stood firm and asked them all to leave. After this incident, I decided I didn't want to see Miranda ever again and wanted nothing to do with my mother, who kept supporting her. I thought that by not contacting either of them, I would be fine. However, yesterday morning, there was a knock at my door that caught me off guard. When I opened it, I saw Miranda standing there with a desperate look on her face. She explained that she was in a dire situation and needed my help. According to her, she had an emergency at work and couldn't find anyone else to look after her kids. She pleaded with me to take care of them, assuring me it would only be for a few hours. I looked at the kids' sleepy, tired faces, and it broke my heart to see how she had woken them up so early just to drop them off at my place. I asked about my parents, and she said they were at our aunt's place. She told me I could verify with them, which I later did. When I suggested that she could call her ex-husband for help, she mentioned that he was still sleeping and wouldn't pick up since he had a night job. She said she had no other option but to come to me. Begrudgingly, I agreed to look after the kids, and she left happily. As I closed the door behind her, a mix of frustration and empathy swirled within me. I couldn't believe the audacity of Miranda dropping off her kids without any prior notice or consideration for my own plans. Despite my resentment, I decided to make the best of the situation for the sake of the innocent children. We played games, watched cartoons, and I even tried to engage them in some simple arts and crafts activities. Surprisingly, they became more docile once we got to know each other, and as time passed, I started to genuinely enjoy their company. When lunchtime arrived, I realized I had no idea if the kids had any allergies, and I couldn't take any risks by feeding them without checking with Miranda first. I dialed Miranda's number, hoping for a swift answer, but there was no response. I tried again after some time, only to reach her voicemail. With no other option, I decided to be direct with the kids. I explained that their mom seemed busy at work and wasn't picking up her phone. I tried not to alarm them and gently asked if they had any known allergies or specific dislikes when it came to food. The oldest, while discussing her preferences, let slip that maybe her mom was busy at a wedding, which was why she wasn't picking up my calls. I furrowed my brow and asked how she knew that. She hesitated before admitting that she overheard Miranda talking about it with a friend on their drive to my place. The pieces fell into place and a surge of anger coursed through me. I thanked the kids for their honesty and reassured them that everything was fine. I immediately called my parents to get to the bottom of this. After much cajoling, my mother finally admitted the truth. Miranda had indeed gone to a wedding, which was supposed to be child-free, with her new boyfriend who had no idea that she was a mom to 2 kids. My mother tried to justify Miranda's actions, saying things like how men didn't like dating single mothers, so she had chosen to keep her kids a secret. I was furious because she had lied to me once again. My sister had manipulated me, exploiting my willingness to help for her own convenience. I then checked Miranda's social media to verify the information. She had posted a few stories on her Instagram from the wedding. She was smiling and day drinking. I shook my head in disappointment as I scrolled through Miranda's Instagram. I realized she didn't have a single photo of her children. My sister, a mother of 2, was actively pretending to be single, denying her own kids a place in her public life. When Miranda came to pick up her kids, we had a massive argument. I made it clear that I wanted no part in her deception and warned her that if she left her kids with me again, I would involve Child Protective Services. Miranda was furious and started to lash out at me, but Tom, who had returned from the office, stepped in and threatened to call the police. This led to her leaving immediately. I felt drained and emotionally exhausted afterward. While I'm grateful for Tom's support, my mother and aunt have reached out, urging me to be more sympathetic to the struggles of a single mother and to help my family in times of need. They suggested that if I don't want to be part of my sister's lies, update 1. Thank you all so much for your understanding and support. I've received numerous messages from strangers who have shared their own experiences with toxic family members like my sister. After reading through the comments, I've realized that my mother is extremely toxic and continues to enable my sister's behavior, clearly favoring her over me. This is particularly unfair since Miranda is the one with the serious issues. I plan to have a conversation with my mother soon. I also called my aunt to get her perspective on the situation, and it turns out my mother hadn't shared the full story with her. After I explained how Miranda had lied to me, forced me to babysit, and hidden her kids from her boyfriend, my aunt apologized and said she would talk to my mother. I don't know what was said, but my mother later sent me a message telling me not to involve her in our personal matters and not to throw my sister under the bus. It's exhausting how my mother can always come up with ridiculous excuses to justify Miranda's behavior, yet never actually reprimands her for anything. Update 2. It's been 2 weeks since my last update. Despite my attempts to distance myself from Miranda, the family tensions have only intensified. My mother has continued to pressure me to forgive Miranda and to babysit her kids. She even started emotionally blackmailing me, saying that with her and Dad getting older, Miranda would be the only family left for me. Determined to address this head-on, I decided to have a candid conversation with her and asked her to meet me separately. I requested that Miranda not be brought up during our meeting, and she agreed. We met at a quiet cafe, hoping for a civil and honest conversation. As we settled into our seats, I took a deep breath, preparing for the difficult discussion ahead. I began by expressing my love for her and Dad, and my desire to maintain a healthy relationship with them. I acknowledged her concerns about aging and the importance of family unity, but stressed that my well-being was essential for any meaningful relationship, including the one with her. I explained the emotional toll Miranda's manipulations had taken on me over the years and how I needed to prioritize my mental health. My mother, visibly conflicted, listened as I recounted instances of Miranda's toxic behavior since our childhood and how it had affected my life. I shared my experiences of feeling overlooked, manipulated, and exploited, hoping to convey the gravity of the situation. As I spoke, I noticed a mix of emotions on her face, ranging from guilt to realization. The conversation took an unexpected turn when, after a thoughtful pause, my mother admitted that she had been aware of Miranda's manipulative tendencies, but had chosen to ignore them to maintain some semblance of family harmony. She confessed that Miranda's premature birth, with its accompanying health complications, had terrified her, leading her to become overly protective of Miranda. Hearing this revelation from my mother broke my heart. I gently reminded her that I was her child, too, and that I needed her support just as much while we were growing up. I explained that it wasn't my fault I was born perfectly healthy and expressed empathy for the difficult position she had been in. I urged her to have a serious talk with Miranda, warning her that if she didn't, her children might come to resent her as much as I did. I emphasized that true healing within the family could only happen if everyone acknowledged and addressed the issues at hand. My mother nodded in understanding, which was quite surprising to me, as I never expected her to truly listen. We discussed the importance of setting boundaries, and I told her I needed my space, so I planned to take some time off from her. She pleaded with me, expressing her hope that I wouldn't go years without talking to her, and that she loved me and regretted the pain she had caused. I reassured her that I wouldn't, but that I needed some time apart to heal. After our talk, I felt much better. Later, my father reached out to me separately, acknowledging Miranda's manipulative behavior and expressing his understanding and support for my decision. He admitted that he regretted enabling Miranda's actions over the years and assured me that he respected my choice to prioritize my well-being. He let me know that he was there for me whenever I needed him, which meant the world to me. I have since cut off all contact with Miranda and installed cameras at my doorstep. If she ever tries to pull the same stunt again, I will be ready to take legal action. Update 3. It's been 4 months since my last update, and I've been encouraged by people on Reddit to share what's been happening. I've intentionally taken a break from social media, uninstalling all my apps, which has significantly improved my mental health. Therapy has also been instrumental in my personal growth journey. Tom and I are still going strong. Last month, during a romantic beach date, he surprised me with a proposal. It was incredibly touching to see him tremble as he got down on one knee and presented the ring. I'm thrilled to be marrying such a wonderful man in just a few months. Although my communication with my parents remains limited, they are genuinely happy for me and adore Tom. I recently learned that Miranda has moved out of my parents' house. Their patience wore thin as she continued her late-night partying and drinking. There were arguments, but ultimately she had to find her own place. My parents have offered to cover her rent for 6 months, but after that, she's on her own. While Dave provides child support, it likely won't cover all her expenses. I hope, especially for her children's sake, that she starts taking responsibility and matures.